I'd like to start off by acknowledging the First Nations people as the original inhabitants of this country. We recognise, respect and celebrate the cultural distinctions and traditions of Indigenous people and value their rich and positive contribution to society. We pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians of the land we work on and acknowledge elders and warriors, past, present and emerging. So that being said, our first presenter is Simon, and I haven't actually seen if Simon's come in the room. Are you here yet, Simon?
I'm here, Laura. I've been here for a while. It's good to see some old faces, friendly faces. It's been a while since I've connected with a lot of people online here.
No, isn't it wonderful? Oh, and I'm sorry, I've just to mention those that would like to have closed captioning, that is available. If you have a look at the bottom toolbar, you'll see a button that says live transcript, and you can switch to show those live captions as we go. And they're automated, so they're not 100% accurate, but they're pretty close too. So sorry, Simon, thought I better quickly explain that one. Have you found the button?
You talking? Is that to me or?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to do the button on the closed caption?
No, just if you want them on your screen. Okay. I'd love to please introduce Simon Rodder officially. He is the Diversity and Youth Manager at Western Bulldogs, but has a colourful history at Special Olympics and a few other diversity and inclusion roles. So super knowledgeable in this space, and we're really looking forward to hear what you've got to say, Simon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Laura. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting. I am on contested grounds here in Footscray, so I recognise the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people as traditional owners of the land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, particularly people that are present here today. You're already showing your leadership by being at an event like this, so thank you for having me. Now, it's amazing how quickly you fall out of Zoom practice after all of last year. So bear with me as I try to navigate on a laptop used to two screens. So there may be a little bit of teething issues when it comes to my presentation today. So let me give it a go. Shit. Oh, Laura, I think you got to let me share screens. There's a first. I've tripped at the first hurdle. Awesome. Okay, let's give this a go. Okay, so we can see a title slide, hopefully.
Yeah, we can see that. No worries, Simon.
Awesome. So quick introduction to myself. As Laura said, my name's Simon Rodder. I'm the Diversity and Youth Manager at the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation. I do have a little bit of experience working in the disability space, but I do defer to some great experts that follow after me that I'm only part of my way through my journey in understanding true inclusion, thanks to some of the leaders that will speak after me. So hopefully I'm just an entree to the main courses that follow. So I did want to just give a quick introduction. As Laura said, I did work for quite a number of years at Special Olympics Australia, before that at Sport Australia and the Australian Sports Commission, and I always had a bit of a passion for inclusion. The spiel I always used to use for those in Melbourne is that if you're white, middle class, able-bodied male and live in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, then you can find access to sport very easily. If you start to change any of those pieces of demographics, it becomes more difficult. So in my career, I've kind of gravitated towards that support of helping overcome some of those barriers faced. But I will say that, again, that it's all a journey. I hate using cliches like that, but it is really important to recognise that we can continually improve, and there's constantly things that I'm learning in this space, and with every role that I go into, there's more to learn. So I encourage you all to continue that learning process too. Everyone's seen these inclusion diagrams before. I think that they've been rocking around for the best part of a decade at the moment. But one of the things that I see again as evolution is around understanding what inclusion means. Inclusion means something very different to everybody, and I think it's very important to be able to recognise that when you're developing a program at a club or across a sport, that it's important to understand who your audience is and what they need in an inclusive program. At times in the history of sport, and particularly in inclusive sport, it's been looked upon poorly to have segregated programs. But for a lot of participants across the country, we do need segregated programs. We need hugely modified equipment. We need coaches that have specific skills and resources to be able to provide experiences that actually engage people and have them continue on in continuing in programs. And then we look at the rest of the journey as being the choice of the individual. And again, at the end of the day, that's where our role lies, is helping provide options for people to participate in sport and their networks to feel comfortable in where they are participating. So it's really important to understand that inclusion is something different for everyone, and that the ultimate decision comes to the individual to see where they want to play sport and be physically active. And often that's what will continue their journey in sport. Just like people that are able-bodied, they may choose to play on a particular night or with a particular cohort of people. With people living with disabilities, we need to respect that wish also. I'll visit this slide at the end as well and kind of refer back to what I've spoken about too. Laura, if you can ask me any questions along the way, that would be awesome too. Now, I am here representing the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation, and I suppose I'm going to talk from our experience as an elite sporting club and where we sit right now when it comes to inclusion. We're a bit of a unique organisation in the Australian landscape, is that the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation is actually a separate not-for-profit entity that sits within the football club. What that allows us to do, having a separate board, is being able to use the brand of the Western Bulldogs AFL Football Club, but reach certain outcomes and certain audiences that are part of our strategy. The mission of the Community Foundation is to create experiences that connect and inspire our people across the community through outreach programs. We deliver programs across the west of Victoria and the west of Melbourne that help people feel more connected. Through these programs, we have a range of inclusive practices, but again, I'll probably be pretty honest here, is it's really important as a local sporting club, as a regional association, or as a peak body, is to understand what audience you're reaching first. I'll say, because of the western suburbs of Melbourne, that our primary targeted community is new and emerging communities. Because of the history of the west of Melbourne, it's been the largest settlement area for new and emerging communities. So our first base is to try and really be successful at engaging new and emerging communities and helping them connect to their community and feel more welcome in their new home. Beyond that, obviously, we have focus on LGBTQIA+, Indigenous, disability, elderly. But what we need to do is really focus our strategy on what our program delivery is and ensure that those programs are inclusive of people that want to join. When we look at our programs, the main 4 themes of our programs focus on improving mental health, intercultural understanding, promoting gender equity, and fostering social inclusion. So all our programs focus on these 4 key themes. And it's really important when you're delivering programs, and I'll be talking a lot about non-sport-based programs, because even though we're the Western Bulldogs Community Foundation, you'll hardly ever see a football delivered in our programs. I know I've got some friends online today from other sports that we work really closely with. And although we'll always say a secondary focus is building our fan base, our primary focus is actually creating experiences across the community. So it really doesn't focus on a particular sport. Our programs, though, are more than sport, and it's potentially a good idea for other organisations to think about how you can provide wraparound services at your sport, either your local association or club, to make people feel more welcome that is beyond the sport field as well. This program delivery that I was talking about is really focused into 3 categories. We've got health and wellbeing stream, which has very successful Daughters of the West and Sons of the West program, which are 10-week programs that focus on connecting adult men and women with local services that improve their health and wellbeing. We've got youth leadership programs that focus on young people reaching their best and being able to become leaders in their community. And some of these programs include the Youth Leadership Project, which we have about 120 young people participating in a 4-month program across west of Victoria. We've also got the Nully Gerring Indigenous Youth Leadership Program, the Goal Mentoring Program for African Australian young people, and leaders of the PAC program for multicultural male and also multicultural female people. Again, this refers back to my earlier slide about potentially having segregated programs to create a safe and welcoming environment for young people, because not everyone has the confidence or competence to be able to join a mainstream program straight off the bat. So there's examples of these programs actually introducing young people to our wider programs that may never have accessed our programs because they may come from a targeted community. Also, when you look at that multicultural female space, there's a lot of cultural respects that we need to honour that may make it easier having it as a separate program. And then we've got our diversity inclusion programs, which is under the banner of Call Play, but that focuses on providing support for new and emerging communities, as well as employment programs to create a network so that people that are newly arrived are able to access services across the community more effectively. One thing I do want to start with is strategy and partnerships. What's really important is to ensure that whatever your sport or local club are doing is actually aligned to your overall vision. There's no point trying to grab onto funding or opportunities if it actually doesn't align to the work that you want to do, or doesn't align to potentially things that are in your community. If you're looking at disability inclusion as a first step, maybe it's worth looking at physical disability or intellectual disability, vision impairment, hearing impairment, and looking at what's in your community to be able to leverage those partnerships there to be able to understand how you can get support from experts in your community, but also how you can attract participants to your programs too. A lot of people are trying to do good, but they might start a program without actually realizing that there's none of that cohort in their community, which isn't really setting the program up to succeed. It's also really important to not burn out that champion at a local club. Often at local clubs, we have the person that's the treasurer of the local club, that's also the under-14s coach, and then also puts up their hand to be able to deliver the disability inclusion program. What you need is whole of club support, and that's looking from the top and getting them to buy in from the start so they understand the benefits of the program and the benefits of inclusion. And then, as I said before about feeding back from the community mapping, it's important to bring on program partners. Don't try and do this all yourself. There are other organisations out there that will have greater expertise in this field and also be able to access resources and funding that may be able to support it in being a more effective program. I think everyone in sport realises how difficult it is to leverage the NDIS, but when you work closely with disability groups, then potentially there's an opportunity to leverage that funding through that partnership-based approach. The next step is around consultation and conversation. Please also always be wary of using the term co-design. I think it's the trend currently is that people in grant applications and when they're talking with people talk about co-design. In simple terms, co-design is creating a program from a blank piece of paper. So if you're actually adapting an existing program, tend to use consultation and get the people in the community around to help work on that program design. And that's from the start. If you're working with a local specialist school, they'll be really open to be able to go into that school and chat to the young people about what they want in a program, what days of the week, what times, because it's really important to get that at the start. So again, you can set up your program to be able to succeed. Also work out the purpose of engaging with those groups. What do you want to learn in consultation and conversation? So before you go into those meetings, make sure that you've got a clear objective of what you want to learn from them. There's no point going in just with an open slate because it could become a little bit unmanageable. There may be recommendations that you won't be able to fulfill, and that's probably not a great way of starting that partnership at the start. And then also looking at points of evaluation. So when you're starting a program, have a look at what you want the outcomes to be, and that will help with that program design. Asking questions along the way will not only help you with your program design, but will help you with your end of evaluation to make sure that you can work out whether the program's been successful or not. Beyond that, consultation and conversation gives a sense of ownership and connection to the people that are coming on board with the program. So it's a really important step in being able to, again, create a successful program. I did want to show you a quick video, which is from our Daughters of the West program. This is Georgie and Anne, who are a mother and daughter that joined in our Daughters of the West program. And what it basically demonstrates is that you need to create a safe and welcoming environment, have ongoing experiences, and be able to connect. So I am going to stop sharing for a second so that I can get this on. Now, please let me know if the audio works. I know sometimes when we swap between screens, the audio drops out. So let's give this a go. What?
There's no audio there, Simon.
No audio?
Oh, it appears your speaker's actually muted down the next to the play button.
Ah. Is that getting audio?
No.
Yeah, this is always the problem with these ones. Let me just try that again.
Gotta love technology. Still haven't got audio. We appear to have lost audio of you speaking as well.
Okay, so that's a case of audio not working. Apologies about that. We've all been through this situation before. What I might do is share the link to that in the chat so that everyone can have access to it. But what it basically is a demonstration of community engagement working at its best. Georgie and Anne were going to a gym at a local sports centre. They were really enjoying that. They'd already built the relationship with that local sports centre. They saw the Daughters of the West program operating out of that sports centre and then spoke to them because they trusted, it was a trusted person that was already at a place that they were going to. Welcomed Georgie, who is the daughter, also welcomed Anne as the mother to be able to come along and also joining the session. So it was a mother-daughter together. So again, continuing to build that safe, ongoing environment. And also creating ongoing experiences so that you've got a gym program or a particular sports program at a centre, but then always looking at what can continue to, what experiences they can continue to get out of that. So it's a really good example of being able to do a community partnership and be able to have that program running. I'm just going to go back to the slides.
What about a minute left, Simon?
Oh, it's about right. So the last step is about empowerment. So opportunities for further engagement and listening to the people with disability and providing them opportunities to leverage their passion and skill. In the top corner of the photos there, we've got Georgia Miller, who was a participant in the Nully Gering program, which was for Indigenous youth, transitioned into the Youth Leadership Project. And then this year, the last photo is at the AFLW 2021 first ever Indigenous round game that was tossing the coin. Similarly, down the bottom, we've got Daniel, who did the Youth Leadership Project last year, then transitioned into our youth advisory group, is a passionate photographer, so now does photos at our events. So these opportunities allow participants to become advocates for our program, but also advocates for themselves and for their community. So it's a really important aspect there. So again, I'll go back to the diagram that I showed at the start around providing opportunities. And that pathway, if people want to move to the integration or inclusion little space there, then they've got the opportunity to. But the last diagram is the most important one, which is that letting the participant decide what their space is in the programs. So that is it, Laura. I don't know. There's my contact details. If anyone wants to touch base with me, more than happy to chat further. Always happy for partnerships at the Western Bulldogs. So if anyone does want to reach out to be able to do a partnership, always happy to do that also.
Thanks so much, Simon. That was really informative. We haven't had any questions come through on the chat. Gail has made a comment, though, about all the more reason for closed captions on videos.
Yeah, absolutely, Gail. And I've just read your comment, and that's why I was asking Laura who did that. I have never done closed captions on Zoom, so I wasn't sure whether that was the host that did that.
Yeah, so it's an application called Rev, R-E-V, and it just plugs into Zoom and does the captions over the top of the Zoom. So,
yeah. So did it happen or not?
No, it didn't. It didn't bring up the captions of the video.
Okay, my apologies.
Does anyone have any questions? Feel free. You can either pop them in the chat and I can ask them, or you can just take yourself off mute and ask Simon any burning questions.
It's all good. I'll take that as it being good then.
I was going to say that's a sign that you've covered everything, Simon.
Awesome. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of it, Laura. And yeah, looking forward to hearing the rest of the speakers.
Thank you very much, Simon. So now I would like to introduce Peter Downs. He's the founding director of the Inclusion Club, who does great work in the space of inclusive resources for people with disability, and they have a podcast. And I strongly encourage you, if you have not seen their website, to go and check it out because it is fantastic. So I'll hand it over to you, Peter.
Thank you. I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully you can...
Yes, we can see that.
See that all right? Is that coming up?
Yep, beautiful.
Cool, excellent. Thank you, Laura. Thanks for the invite, and hello, everybody. Simon, we must catch up very soon. It's been too long to catch up. Yeah, thanks very much, Laura, for the invite. Always great to catch up and to contribute where I can here. I'd like to pay respects to the Ngunnawal people where I'm sitting in Canberra here, and it's beautiful day on their land, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. It was a beautiful trip around their land this morning, around the lake. Did a quick, very slow run around the lake this morning, and it was wonderful land there. So okay, for this presentation, it's always difficult doing things like this because there's so much we could talk about. In my experience with both Play by the Rules and before that the Australian Sports Commission, managing the Disability Sport Unit for 17 years, and now with the Inclusion Club and trying to revamp that up, I've had the pleasure and privilege really of being able to see lots of programs from across the world and being involved in this area for such a long time, and it's really hard to try and encapsulate in 15 minutes 2 or 3 dot points that I think might be useful, but I'll give it a crack anyway. And so I've tried to keep it to both practical sense, what I think are really important things in a practical sense to make inclusion work, and also a little bit globally as well. So a bit of an attitudinal global view on it as well. And the first practical point is exactly that, to be practical. Of all my experience over the years, the one thing that makes and has been most consistently the catalyst for change and progress has been when something practical happens, when there's an activity. And thank God that sports are usually really good at this. Sports are very good at the practical side of running activities, of running events, of organising common tries, expos, all those kind of practical things that they are actually really good at. What I've seen, though, is a propensity to look at inclusion in terms of policies and codes and all the kind of supportive structural things rather than the practical. And yet, every time I see something practical happen, change inevitably occurs after that. Be the change you want to see in the world. I think that was Mahatma Gandhi here. I got into one of those quote modes when I started doing this presentation. But you can be, and the practical side of it, when you see inclusion working this way, it really does make very, very quick progress. There's tools out there, to help in terms of the practical side of it. So using the tree, for example, I think a lot of you would have heard of the tree principle or tree model, which is looking at teaching style, rules and regulations, environment and equipment. So it's a simple model for running activities where you can look at adapting and modifying, say, the teaching style of how you might be from a more verbal instruction to practical demonstration example, to modifying rules and regulations, to manipulating the environment, adapting the environment to suit particular groups, and the equipment, vital. You can change equipment very, very easily in this way. And these are the sorts of things that sports are good at already. Good coaches and good administrators already do this kind of thing anyway. So it makes sense and can be very practical. On a related thing, a few years ago, I was involved in a number of programs around LGBTI inclusion. And one of the things that made a huge difference to, the name of the program's gone out of my head now, in Victoria, with the hockey clubs in Western Melbourne. Simon, help me out here, I can't remember it now. The program there was a catalyst for change, was collateral and being able to visually see the things like the rainbow socks, the posters that went up. It was a catalyst for discussion on issues that had never been discussed before within that community. And so little things can make a big difference in that way. And being practical, and rather than spending too much time around looking at codes and policies and practices in that way, is a really, really my big recommendation is do something practical in the community. Be visible about it. Don't be afraid about making mistakes as well, because you will. Very, very unlikely you're going to totally stuff it up. It's very, very unlikely. The likeliness here is that there'll be small mistakes and things you can learn from, which is great, which is what you want to make progress. But don't be afraid to make mistakes in that way. So be visible, be practical. There are tools and resources out there to help in that way. And Tree is just one of them, one of the sorts of tools that can be used. Which leads to something that Simon's already talked about. He talked about community mapping as well. You can't do this alone. We often characterize inclusion as reflecting the communities that you're in. And that's what we want to do. We want clubs and sports clubs to reflect the communities that they're in. You cannot do it alone. As Simon said, there's a lot of help out there. There are community groups, there are schools, there are other centres out there that can really help. And viewing your club and your association organisation as a connector rather than a deliverer, particularly, is a good way of looking at it in that way. So rather than, if you approach a local service provider, for example, it's not really, there's a lot of issues around perceptions of what sports clubs are in the disability sector. So to talk about competition and teams and playing and winning trophies is probably not the first approach you should recommend a sport take to a local service provider. I'd talk about community, about those connections, about opportunities to participate, about how welcoming and open you are to participation in a whole bunch of ways other than just playing the game. So years ago we looked at through Sports Connect, we used a very simple supply and demand model. So we looked at boosting sports and helping them with things like Tree and adapting and modifying and ways they can be inclusive as a club, but also looked at the disability sector as well and what they can do. And at times there was a big gap between what the sports perceptions of inclusion was and what disability sectors perceptions of inclusion was. So there needed to be a fair bit of work went on in trying to join that, in trying to dispel some of those myths, to give a perception of sport in the disability community that it's not just about playing the game, that it's about a whole bunch of other things. Very good to hear Simon again say that it's not, he views Western Bulldogs as something bigger than a football club, and it's their role in the community that was really the view they took. Their role in the community was it, rather than being just the football club there. So that broader role is really important to try and bridge that and to make that a strong emphasis particularly when talking to the disability sector. Also, I wanted to mention being a connector in the community, one of the things that is really important in that role, which I worked on for years in that sort of connecting role, is something that, I don't know if you've seen if you've read the Tipping Point from Malcolm Gladwell. There's a great part in there that talks about the strength of weak ties. Now, some of the groups you might be able to make contact with may not be your best friends, may not be a group you've ever worked with before, may have completely different philosophy. But the strength of those weak ties are really important in terms of how inclusion can work, because those weak ties are often what makes a massive difference if you can make them work there. So think about the strength of your weak ties, the groups you never worked with before, never thought of before, and make a contact and an effort to get in touch with them, because that will open all kinds of new doors that have been there before. So think about the strength of weak ties. And finally, I know I'm rushing through this a little bit, but I was conscious of the time. This is quite a difficult one. Oh, a good quote. Unus, does anyone know this? Unus pro omnibus, omnis pro uno. All for one, one for all. You know, the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan. And I thought that would be quite a good one here, because in all my experience across all different sectors, particularly the last 7 years with Play by the Rules, when talking inclusion and diversity, it's really not, I don't say not beneficial, but it's to have a more global view of what you're doing on inclusion is highly beneficial in the long run, and you make quicker progress with that global view of inclusion rather than focusing on targeted populations specifically, whilst recognizing there are differences. So while we're talking about disability here, do not lose sight of the fact that diversity and inclusion affects everybody in there. So, and is really beneficial for everybody involved in the local community. There's been a great, and I was part of this whole, for 2 decades, part of it where nationally and statewide we'd have units of work for Indigenous inclusion, for gender, for disability, and manage a disability sport unit. And I would work with the Indigenous sport unit for quite some time. So I'd have meetings, we talk about the same things, and we go off and do our own thing and create our own strategies and our own policies. And I think in retrospect, that was something really we could have done a lot better. And in recent times, we have seen models emerge where we look at the broader view of inclusion, recognize that there are differences in inclusion, recognize there are differences, particularly for people with disability in some ways, but also develop a strategy that is globally about inclusion and diversity. There. Hopefully I've expressed that well, because I've seen that trend in recent years in particular, and I think it's the way to go, is develop things like an overall framework for diversity and inclusion, recognize there are differences in particular strategies and ways of including Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse, people with disability, recognize differences, but have a global view of inclusion more broadly. And I think that applies to the local club as much as it does a national sports organisation. And we've seen national sports organisations go that way by adopting things like the 7 pillars of inclusion as a general framework for inclusion for their sports. So we've got national bodies do that. But a local club can do that too. So the 7 pillars of inclusion on Play by the Rules, have a look at it. It's a common language of inclusion and diversity more broadly. You can apply it to whatever population you wish in that way. So think of inclusion globally rather than specifically initially, and then start to look at some of the particular differences would be my thought. I've run through that quite quickly. Hopefully I'm on time, Laura.
Yep, going well. A couple minutes left.
Okay, just to kind of summarize. So the biggest catalyst for change, if there's any nervousness about what to do, is be practical. Do something in your community. Get something happening, and this is what sport's good at. I would definitely encourage that. Each time I've seen models of good practices, because they're actually doing something, they're prepared to make mistakes and move forward with that. Make actions. You can't do it alone. So look at who's in your local community. Look to do that mapping that Simon talked about, and think who is it in your local community? What does your local community look like? And does our sports club or organisation look like that too? And finally, think of inclusion diversity globally, more broadly, and the benefits of what you do in one area will benefit everybody in there. So although you might be thinking about people with disabilities here, A lot of the things you talk about, we look at diversity and inclusion more broadly, will benefit everybody. And it's important to keep that in mind and develop frameworks around that.
Thank you, Peter. That was really fantastic. I love how much what you had to say really echoed what Simon had said. You know, there's some really common themes strung through there, which, you know, as we were discussing it at the beginning of this meeting, it's always good to kind of reinforce some of those same key messages. I'll just open it out to anyone. If you've got questions for Peter, pop them into the chat and I can read them out. Otherwise, take yourself off mute and ask away. That would be fantastic.
I'd like to ask a question of Peter.
Yep.
If you're working with a club that's never had an understanding of inclusion in all of its facets, what would be the first thing that you would focus on?
Nice, Gail. I think initially I wouldn't talk about inclusion, integration, mainstreaming, all those terms that we would commonly use. I would talk of the language around reflecting the community that you're in, who's in your community. And people have different understandings. Even in this group here, a pretty informed group, we'll all have slightly different understandings of inclusion and diversity and integration, all those kind of things. So you know, you can kind of put people off and they can pigeonhole some of their thinking in that way. So I'd talk about their local community. I'd say, how does it reflect the local community? How do we know if it reflects? They may say that it does, but how do they know? Have we done that kind of community mapping? Even a very basic kind of community mapping will be beneficial. And say, well, what do we need to do? Who do we need to talk to if it doesn't reflect our local community? Sure, I know that some sports have a particular kind of targeted demographic, targeted gender, all kinds of targeted populations that sports attract. But Simon's right, and sport is much bigger than that. And even in a club sense, it's bigger than that. It's not just about the people who play the game or the people who compete at weekends. There's a whole bunch of other things going on. So I talk to them really about reflecting the community, how we can expand on membership, how can we gain kudos in the community, what kind of community events can we hold, you know, all those kind of things. What can we contribute to? What's our role in the community? Rather than focusing on inclusion, diversity, and targeted populations, I think that you can get stuck down a rabbit hole with that.
We have a question in the chat here. So obviously achieving an ideal inclusion model is a longer term goal, but what's your top tip or two that a club can follow to immediately increase their inclusion? And that's for either Simon or Peter, if you're still with us, Simon.
I'd jump in because I think Simon might say the same sort of thing, really. I think make that connection. All clubs will have connections already in the community for sure. Some will be loose connections, some will be really strong connections. Again, think about the strength of weak ties. Think about your loose connections that may have been good 2 or 3 years ago and revisit them. Have a look who's in the local community and start to go there with a really open, I would go with an open mindset, with an open attitude towards participation in your sport. Don't go there with thinking we're going to recruit new members so they can play in the teams at weekends. Go there with the attitude that we want to really connect to your organisation. We want to open opportunities to participate in many different ways in our club. So at least make one connection, do something in that way, and then do something practical with it.
Simon, do you have anything to add to that, if you're still on?
Sorry, yeah, I would agree with Peter and just say that it's actually just about
getting something going. Sometimes people can feel crippled by inertia, and it's just important to be able to just actually get out there and do something. And that's where people start to build confidence as well. So that's probably my key takeaway.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that, Peter. And so I'll introduce our next guest. Now, we were going to hear from Michael Thomson from Sport Inclusion Australia. I did see him logged on before. I don't know if he's still here, but he's getting someone else to present on his behalf because he's travelling at the moment. So I'd like to introduce Chantal Lewis from Sport Inclusion Australia.
Thank you, Laura. I'll just share a screen. Thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of Sport Inclusion Australia. Just want to make sure that I'm getting this right as well.
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah. So for those who may not have heard much about Sport Inclusion Australia, it was formerly AusRapid, and it's a national organisation established to assist the inclusion of people primarily with an intellectual disability into the mainstream community using sport as a medium. Sport Inclusion Australia have worked within the Australian sporting sector and have partnerships with NSOs, we have state member organisations, as well as councils and government. And we're really, I guess, proud of what we've done and the success that we've had in increasing the number of sporting organisations and clubs to take responsibility for inclusion, focusing on ability and social inclusion practices. It's really important for us to, I guess, advocate for for people to have not just rights, but also able to access the sport in the community at whatever level they aspire to. And when we look at inclusion and community within a sports club, understanding that access isn't always a ramp, and being involved in a club and a community isn't always about playing the sport. What other ways can clubs ensure that people are included through volunteering, through having access to you know, being a water boy or a water girl, or working a raffle, or working the barbecue, or help keeping time. So understanding that inclusion isn't always about joining a club to play in the club, but also, you know, what can we do in part of that community to create that positive environment. Through Sport Inclusion Australia, we have a partnership, a collaborative partnership with Deaf Sports Australia, Blind Sports Australia, and we've come up with Inclusion Alliance Australia. And the Inclusion Alliance, which was formed in 2020, is that partnership, and we've used our resources and expertise over many years in ways that we can look at putting resources and tools together. And the shared vision is effectively to build the capacity of sporting organisations, recreation, as well as the fitness sectors to be more inclusive of people with a disability. Just going to play a video and hopefully the sound works.
Australia is a country of different landscapes and diverse cultures with a high quality of life. Of the 25 million people in Australia, around 4.4 million people have some form of disability. That's 1 in 5 people. Vision Australia estimates about 357,000 people in Australia who are blind or have low vision. 1 in 6 Australians are affected by some hearing loss. In 2012, there were around 668,000 Australians with intellectual disability. This is consistent with today's global data showing that 2 to 3% of the world population live with an intellectual impairment. No matter your age, race, or ability, disability can affect everyone. Today, people with disability enjoy better health and longer lives. The only thing that separates a person with a disability is that they are unable to do certain things in the same way as mainstream society. Understanding more about disability is getting to know 4.4 million Australians who are longing for one thing: inclusion. This is the opportunity to play your part. It's time to change attitudes and challenge perceptions. Inclusive sport programs benefits everyone. Who knows what great opportunities could be lost if people only see the disability. Sporting organisations that reflect the diversity of community it serves gains trust, loyalty and respect. By making your sports programs and memberships accessible and inclusive, you can play your part in a better Australia for all.
So through the Inclusion Alliance, a number of resources have been developed to support clubs, NSOs, SSOs, governments and councils. And so a lot of those tools are around some videos, one that we've just seen, and there'll be another one that I'll show again later. Some toolkits around inclusive coachings, both for schools, sports, venues. We've done some webinars and presentations already to some local clubs and through some NSOs and presentations. I mean, everything's sort of stepping away from this face-to-face, and we're starting to do a lot more Zoom meetings. So it gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to really connect with other clubs and people within their community as well. We're currently working on an education module, so we're still finalising that, and that will go to the website once that's up and live, as well as putting together some resources around that pathway and eligibility and classification. Breaking that down into really some simple videos and some information that clubs can actually see and understand what pathways may be available, or what pathways are already available within their sport that they could have access to. I'm going to show you guys another video, and now we should have the volume. Let's see. Work? No, oh no, my video didn't work. I'll bring that up in a moment. I'm just going to stop sharing and bring it up for you.
Chantal, a few people have asked for the link to the previous video you played as well, so maybe you can share the links to both of those when you've finished your presentation.
Excellent. I'll just... Sorry. Here we go. Technology, hey?
Demands commitment.
I can hear that.
Sport demands effort. It demands commitment. But for an athlete who is deaf, blind, or has an intellectual impairment, their success relies on your effort too. So if you expect the best from us, we need more from you. Put yourself in our shoes when you're talking to us. Make your instructions clear. Be patient. There's no need to raise your voice. An athlete who is blind can hear you fine. And an athlete who is deaf understands you better when you face them and talk normally.
There is no I in team.
But there's a you in communication. So play your part.
Play your part.
Play your part.
Play your part when it comes to communication, and we'll all perform better.
So we have put together quite a number of videos, resources and toolkits that, I guess, share the stories from our cohorts. They're the ones speaking, they're the ones going through what supports them and what makes them feel included in a club environment. And communication was one of these things that kept coming up from all of the areas, is that they feel is such an important area. So some of those toolkits that we've put together is got some of those simple communication tips that we feel are important for clubs to have I guess, the more confidence, because we don't think we should recreate things. We don't think we need to be changing everything. We believe that if you're from a sport and a club and you know how to play the sport, then and coach the sport, you're a good coach, and we don't want to change that. But if there's some tips or some tools that we can support those clubs with on to give them the confidence on how to feel like they're more inclusive, then that's sort of really important, both to Sport Inclusion Australia and the Alliance. And through these resources that we've developed, we feel that that is one way that we can really help clubs to be more successful in their pathway.
Thank you. Thank you, Chantal. That was great. And they're quite dramatic videos. They certainly have the music to spur you on to want to make change.
Yeah, and I was cautious of time, and as I said, we've sort of put some together, and I was thinking, which one should I use or what should I bring out? And I didn't want to spend the whole time, although I was thinking I could probably just do 15 minutes of videos. But, you know, I guess it's really important to make sure that the people here today know that there is places for them to access resources and tools to support them in ensuring that they have got the confidence to run inclusive clubs and sports and understand. I think, like I said before, it's not always about playing the sport. There's a lot of other things that's involved in that.
And we'll send out, AAA Play will send out to everyone who's registered a link for this recording, and we'll send out the resources that you've mentioned as well, so that people can access those, and from Sport Inclusion and the Inclusion Club as well. So thank you very much. Does anybody have some questions for Chantal? Again, pop them in the chat and we can read them out for you. Or if you would like to just ask, feel free to unmute yourself and talk away. I think you've left everyone speechless, Chantal. Thank you for your time. We'll move on to our next speaker. I'd like to introduce Kelly Armstrong. She's the Access and Engagement Officer for the City of Port Phillip. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks for the privilege to be on this event. I feel very blessed to be here. Let me get my screen sharing happening so I can do the same thing that everyone else has and share my presentation.
We can see that. That's great.
Yep. Now I'm just going to get to, okay. Thank you. All right. So I would like to also acknowledge the Yolokotwilum clan of the Boonwurrung and pay respects to elders both past and present. And also say thanks to all the speakers who've come before me. I think that the people in the room here are just as experienced as I am around inclusion and disability, and looking at some of the other participants in the room, I have that imposter syndrome feeling of, oh, I'm not the most expert person here. Everyone else has experience to share. But I guess what I've tried to do with my presentation is make it as practical, such as Peter has also, and you'll see that a lot of the points that I will raise have already been spoken to. So I guess it's reinforcing some of those concepts. So we've been sitting for a while. I just thought I'd take the opportunity for people to just stand up and do a quick stretch, if that's all right. Stand up or where you are, seated, wherever's comfortable, and just chuck your arms in the air and just give it a bit of a stretch so you're ready to go again. Great. On my view, I've only got a handful of people I can see, but I'm hoping everybody else is feeling ready to go. So I chose the topic for my my speaking to be Get Started and Celebrate. What I wanted to just talk about first of all is why am I here to talk about inclusion. So I've always had a very strong moral compass around fairness and inclusion. I've become a parent in the last decade, and that's given me another perspective again around inclusion. I trained as an occupational therapist originally, and that's why I'm putting this simple framework up for you to consider. This is generally how I approach the work that I do. So thinking about the person, what their occupation is. So, sorry, the slide as it's come on to present view seems to have lost its view. I need to go back. So if you think about the occupation of a person, so in this situation, we're talking about the sporting activity. And if you think about then the environment that the person is doing that activity within, whether it's the physical environment or the social environment, you can see the little intersectionality in the middle of all those circles talks to the occupational performance. So that's where we want people to have the balance, I guess. So you want to get optimal performance. And I'm sure this is not unfamiliar to people in the sporting sector. These are the topics I'm going to cover. Inclusion, what does it mean? Be curious, action and celebrations. I've worked in healthcare and local government, and I know from my experience of just making small adjustments for people that they can have a big impact on the experience for somebody. So I guess, well, now that I'm working in local government and have been for a good decade or so, I know that I'm still using my occupational therapy skills, considering that basic framework as I build the capacity of my colleagues in council and also community members around providing information and building their capacity to navigate the system better. I'm going to use the chat function for a few seconds. If everyone can just open that up and type into that space a disability that comes to mind for you. Now, I think if I'm sharing the screen, it's a bit tricky for me to actually see the chat. Is that right, Laura? Maybe you can read those out for me, for us.
We have got amputees, CP, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, vision impaired, ASD.
That's great.
Yep.
Good. So the
hearing impaired, a couple of hearing impairs.
My point for getting everybody to engage in this is to point out that disability is different for everyone. And there's lots of different, can I hide that view? Just wondering so that.
We've lost your audio, Kelly. You've just gone on mute. I can see your little microphone's on mute, so the actual Zoom mic is muted. Maybe stop sharing this. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, everyone. So I'm getting a bit distracted by the faces, so I'm just going to move you down a little bit, so no disrespect. Inclusion. So I guess one of the things in terms of being practical is to think about what does it mean for your club. If you think about disability being a big tent, as we've just shown through giving a few examples of different types of disabilities, everyone's going to need something different for participation. I've got on this slide here inclusion versus other, and I think Simon spoke very well to the inclusion diagram earlier, so I won't harbour on that, but totally agree with the points that have been made there around providing options for people to make their own choices. Equity, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this diagram around equity and equality. Different people will need different things to participate. And I think, as was shown with last year's theme for International Day for People with Disability in December, non-visible disability is everywhere. And we need to consider the impacts of non-visible disability and inclusion. What that means for different types of disability will be different. And the often unsung heroes are our carers who are in the background supporting people with disability. So there are a lot of barriers for them to participate and feel included as well. So I just wanted to flag that cohort that's very relevant in our conversation around inclusion. So sitting down as a club and considering what's your experience already of disability inclusion. Do you have members already in your club who experience some type of disability, and what do you already do to include them? So just mapping out, what are you already doing successfully? As was mentioned earlier by Simon and Peter, does your club represent the local community demographic? If you're thinking about bringing some different ways of doing your sport, is there already a modified version for your sport? And if there's not what you would like to do, how can you branch out and do that differently? Your sporting association is probably a really great contact for that conversation. How am I going for time there, Laura?
Good 5 minutes left.
Super. I guess just harboring on coming back to the point of disability and it being different for everyone, there is a definition from WHO which talks to all the different types of permanent ongoing disability types and conditions. But the phrase that I really like is, and I can't remember who said it, but if you've met somebody with a disability, then you've met a person with a disability. You haven't met everybody. So my next topic, now it's not letting me push that, there we go, is to be curious. Curiosity takes you a long way, and doing it in a respectful way can be really constructive. So taking some time as a club to identify the barriers for the different types of abilities that you would like to include in your club. There's no single model. You can work with the strengths of your existing club membership. As I mentioned before, look at what examples people have. And look at the social and the environmental aspects of your club. So I think attitudes and communication, physical infrastructure and technology are all really important ways to demonstrate inclusion for your club. If you think, I know AAA Play has got a lot of resources on their website to support with this journey. And in fact, I used that to prepare for this presentation today. So I'd really encourage the use of those resources. When you look at the physical environment for a person, you've got to consider the whole journey for that individual. So it's not just about coming and being part of that sporting activity. You've got to think about how they navigate through the building. Will they be able to find somewhere to park their car? What are the change room facilities like? The toilets, when snacks or drinks are offered, is that offered with different options? Is there finger food, or different ways that people can engage with the different nourishment that's offered? Where are the spaces that you socialise? What tools have you got in your first aid kit to engage people with different ways of communication? Or somebody who might feel really anxious when an emergency happens and they don't feel in control. There are tools that can be used for supporting those situations. What signage or wayfinding have you got around your venue or your sporting area to help people who might be new to the area and don't know where to go for different things? And one thing that's often neglected is the emergency egress plans for people with different abilities to get themselves out in a hurry from a building or from a sporting area. Universal design is a growing trend, and I'd really encourage all of you to explore what's available. There's a group called the Centre for Universal Design Australia, and they've got a newsletter that can be signed up to and can educate further. Grants, funding for making changes to your physical infrastructure is often a barrier for clubs to engage in, and AAA Play has got a link to some information there on the website. But identifying who you have in your club that has skills and is confident with making applications for grants is a really good thing to map out. Communication, the language that's used on your website, on your social media, how you engage with your local connections, your sponsors, your businesses, how you recruit people to your club membership, the schools that you might be engaging with. The way that you communicate can tell people if you are a welcome and inclusive club to join. The next slide I have would give you, I thought it might be useful just to give a really simple view of an implementation plan. So I'll come back to that in a second. I'll just finish this slide. So creating options for participation. So being clear about all the roles in the club so people can know where they might fit in, what can they bring that could be of value. If you think about how you throw a ball from A to B, the point of it is usually that you've thrown the ball. It gets to where you want it to be, but how you've done it is probably not always important as to the end result. So if you think about that when you're considering the different abilities for people in different roles, that could broaden the perspective a little around who does what. Communication access is another area that's really good for key people in your club to feel comfortable with. Knowing about making eye contact with people they're talking with, how people might communicate with a yes or no question, feeling comfortable when communication boards or assistive technology is used for communication, things like text to voice. And I think based on my experience in council, giving opportunities for colleagues to have a go at being involved in those situations can really boost confidence around the next time it happens. And
Sally.
Pardon?
Couple minutes left.
Thanks, Laura. And look, pen and paper can take you a long way when it comes to communication. Checking in with members for positive experiences that can be captured, celebrating your successes, and thinking about what can be done next. So keeping curiosity at the front of what you're doing all the time. I've just done a really basic implementation plan here. Sorry, it's really busy. I just wanted to give a few examples of strategies that you might like to consider having within your club. So just what do you want to achieve, how you will do it, who will drive it, when will you do it by, and how will you know that it works. So some strategies might be around a social story for your first aid kit that I mentioned earlier, something along those lines. So you might mock up a version for your club, looking at other examples from experts around you. You might suggest that there's an inclusion working group that's established and the first aid officers feel comfortable with using it. And you want to have it ready for pre-season. You might want to test it out with people in the club already and get feedback from the first aid officers who are using it. I'll briefly touch on those strategies, won't talk through them, just be mindful of time. But looking at funding for modified equipment, you might look at grant applications, stories on your website that demonstrate inclusion. So use of inclusive language and symbols, photos that demonstrate what you're doing, and keeping the conversation alive. Possibly looking at having a person on the committee with a disability. So being clear, as I was saying before, around those roles and skills for each of the positions in the club. And finally, action and share the celebrations. To tell people about your successes, use the channels that you've got available to you. AAA Play has got a regular newsletter and updates for people to know about what's going on, but you've got other channels available to you. You've got your sporting associations, your local connections, so use those and celebrate your moments of success. Keep the conversation alive within your club so that it continues to be part of your culture. Just keep doing it and go with a continuous improvement approach. So checking back in with your networks, reviewing your implementation plan to see the progress you've made or where you might need to do things a little bit differently. And bearing in mind that it can take time for people with disability to build trust in a new community connection and feel confident for themselves in a new physical environment as well, sporting environment. I loved the call to action, Chantal, play your part, really spoke to me. Having all those resources and videos available, use them. That's what they're there for. So just finally, that's me and my contact details at the City of Port Phillip. And I hope that's been useful and informative.
Thanks, Kelly. That was great. Some really practical things that we could implement there. Are you able to make those slides available? We can pop them up with the recording on AAA Play, because I think that some of those frameworks will actually be really great to be able to come back and have a good look when we've got time and space to do that.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Does anyone have any questions for Kelly? Again, you can pop them in the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask away. You've covered everything, Kelly. It's a good sign.
It's overwhelming. There's a lot to think about.
There is. Look, and that's one of the advantages of having this recording, is those that can't participate today can watch it, but it means as well those that did participate can go back and review the content, you know, if they sort of want to have another listen to one of our speakers and that kind of thing. So fantastic. Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to our panel conversation with our ambassadors. So I've just introduced you to 3 of our AAA ambassadors. These are volunteers who very generously donate their time to help support the missions of what AAA Play is all about. They are people with lived experience of disability, or in Emma's case, a parent of children with a disability that are actively engaged in sport and recreation. And so it's really great to have this opportunity to be able to talk to people firsthand about their experience. We've heard from, our experts about how a club can move towards inclusion. And so now we're going to actually hear from the participants themselves about how they go about their journey of participating in sport. So I'd like to welcome, please, Emma Renison, who is the mother of Sunny and Evie Rose. I'd also like to introduce Tony Langdon. Tony lives out in the regional areas of Victoria, so he has quite a unique perspective from that angle, and also Andrea Cadazzi. Have I said that right, Dre? Good. I was a little concerned coming into this that I was going to get your name wrong. So welcome, Emma, Dre, and Tony. Thank you so much for coming here. So we've got a couple of questions to run through, and I just encourage, I'll sort of name out, so that we're not all talking over each other, and we can go from there. So our first question is, what sport and recreation have you participated in, and what was some of the challenges you faced in being able to participate in sport and active recreation? Emma, we might start with you. Do you want to have a chat from the perspective of Sunny and Evie Rose?
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you, Laura, for inviting us along to join. I've got Sunny, who is 8, and Evie Rose, who's 11. Sunny is incredibly sporty and always has been. He plays wheelchair tennis and wheelchair basketball regularly, but he's also tried out about just about everything else you can think of as well, including with Dre too. I'm doing some ice hockey. Evie Rose has scoliosis and wears a back brace, and she's participated in dance and life-saving in the Nippers program. So as far as challenges go, I mean, for Sunny, because he's young, it was my first challenge was finding where to go with sports for him, and this is where I connected with Laura and AAA Play, because he was diagnosed when he was 4, but already heavily into sports. And we needed to find something, some way to continue that. And AAA Play gave us details of a tennis club local to us, and basketball, which are the 2 things. So we got lucky in that through our connection with our OT at the time, she knew about AAA Play and told us to go and speak to them. But a lot of families don't have so much information, and I think just we all share information between ourselves, but that can be the first challenge that as a parent you're faced with, especially when you're trying to navigate your way through a different lifestyle if diagnosis is when they're a little bit older. So for equipment as well, because we didn't know anything really about sporting equipment, tennis didn't, we had to find a sports chair. The basketball team had funded equipment that we could use, but Sonny was so small at the time that his legs just kind of sit over the edge of the sports chair. So finding equipment that he could actually play in was difficult. We're now in the process of, we've had a sports chair on loan. We're now in the process of trying to get one funded through the NDIS. However, we still don't know if that will definitely be funded or not. So cost is also a bit of a tricky one, trying to work all of that out. I find as well, like travel can be difficult with to try and find a specific sport that is suitable for a wheelchair sports player who is younger. We're happy to travel, which I think I don't know, I'm generalizing, but if I find people do travel for sport anyway, but we're happy to travel wherever we can find the right sports for Sonny, and tennis is his absolute passion. So I know that that's going to involve more travel as he gets older anyway and starts being old enough to compete. But I do know other families that it's too much to travel. So finding somewhere local that they can play is just so it's so important. And I think, there's lots of things I could talk about, but I don't want to go on too long. One thing I did find with my daughter, her needs are very different to Sonny's, but she was participating in a community-centered dance program, which is where both my children started off with sports, and was finding what groups there were within the community centre. And she was diagnosed with scoliosis a couple of years after she'd started a dance program, and they just didn't know how to adapt to suit her. They said, yes, we can continue to teach her, but there wasn't really any changes that they knew how to do. I was giving information, but it was just really difficult to for them to know how that would suit her within a class without feeling singled out or without just not doing anything. Unfortunately, we couldn't continue with the class, but I know dance is something that she'd still really love to do. So it's something that we'll look into again in the future. But I think that was a big challenge, just to try and also as a parent to make that kind of decision as to how it's going to, what's the right kind of sport for your child as well. Sorry, I feel like I'm waffling on a little bit, but yes.
We might jump over to Dre, because Dre, I'm interested to hear your perspective on sort of what some of those challenges were facing sport. You're coming from an experience of an acquired injury. an acquired disability. So you've had both sides of the coin of joining sport and participating in sport as an able-bodied individual, and then as a person with a disability. Did you want to talk to that a little bit more?
Thank you, Laura, and thanks everyone for taking time out of their day. So yeah, as Laura said, I have an acquired disability. I became an amputee after a motorbike accident 10 years ago, so it'll be 10 years this year. So before I became an amputee, I mean, you literally use any sport. I'd swim, run, motocross, anything, snowboarding, you name it, I did it, I'll try it, no questions asked. After acquiring my injury, I think the first sport that I really got into got back into, I should say, was swimming, simply because it was a very easy sport to get into. I was living in Sydney at the time, and the place where I was living had a pool in the grounds. So, literally I was at home during my recovery period. So I think it was my first month at home, and I would just go down to the pool and go for a swim. As simple as that. I mean, it would get me back into it, build up my strength. And then the second sport, which I managed to get back into, was running. But as most of you would know, you unfortunately need specific prostheses to be able to do those different sports. So I think that was the biggest challenge. The first initial challenge was getting the most suitable device to be able to participate in sport. And then after that, I actually moved to Canada for a few years. And I was fortunate enough that my prostheses were funded. So while I was there, I took the opportunity to get back into snowboarding. That was through the Whistler Adaptive Snow Sports Program, or WASP for short. And basically I just went on their website, had a look at what options and what they had available for amputees, and in general people with varying disabilities, whether it's sit skiing or if you're a quadruple amputee, and you can go snowboarding. So I contacted the WASP, and fortunately I just talked to my prosthetist, who was able to, modify the alignment of my prostheses. And I was able to go snowboarding for the first time after, I think it was two years that I'd had my accident. So it was pretty momentous occasion. I mean, definitely for my self-esteem and just in general, it was just like, it was amazing. I mean, the feeling you get when, you can hop on a board and just go down the mountain as if nothing were, it was incredible. So after that, I moved back to Australia, and here I am in Melbourne. And then I just out of interest, I started looking into para ice hockey. So unfortunately, we have access to mountains here in Victoria, but a bit wishy-washy in terms of quality of the snow. So I thought, why not try another sport, and got into para ice hockey through the Australian Para Ice Hockey Association. They were lucky enough to have sleds on offer to allow people to come and try, and they had a come and try day. And yeah, pretty much just fell right into it. Luckily, there's no need for specific equipment in terms of prostheses. So it's just really a matter of having the equipment available in terms of sleds and sticks, and obviously protective equipment, which is available at the ice arena. And yeah, I was pretty much on my way, just simple as that. Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, in terms of other sports, like as I said, I'll try anything. But I think the biggest challenge coming from an amputee's perspective is access to prostheses, so artificial limbs, which are sport specific, or can at least be modified to safely perform the sport that you want. And if you do require a specific device, such as ice hockey sled, that the club that you're going through or the association that you're going through does have access and can give people the opportunity to rent or loan the device that is required.
Yeah, great advice. Tony, you mentioned your journey of sport was not so much through the all abilities pathways, but more participating in mainstream sport. So did you want to just talk a little bit about when you did attend those mainstream sports, what did the club do to make you feel welcome and ensure that your disability wasn't a barrier to participation? What did they do, if anything?
Yeah, well, I'm probably quite a different era of everyone else. I have a couple of things that sort of made things a bit difficult at first. One being age. A lot of things weren't sort of, inclusion wasn't such a thing in the 1970s and 80s. The other thing is that I'm what they call twice exceptional, meaning I have a high IQ, but I also have a significant disability, in my case, ASD level 2, to use the official terminology. We prefer just to call it autism in our community. That combination meant that I actually wasn't diagnosed until my 20s, by which time I'd been participating in sport for close to 15 years. So, there was no inclusion, and it was a lot of trial and error on my part, but I still did try a number of sports, judo, footy, cricket, gymnastics. That one was successful. A couple of other things. As I've got older, I haven't had any specific inclusion principles. Even now, I'm still a little bit ahead of the curve, but I do find certain communities, the running community, the athletics community, have a general attitude of they take people as they are. They've got a passion for the sport. They're still quite inclusive on a social level. I still have a lot of challenges. One of them is if I have to travel in a group, accommodation, especially as I get older, it gets worse. Has some sensory requirements. So does social gatherings food-wise. Unfortunately, everyone's popular go-to here is things like coleslaw, and that involves mayonnaise, which has a taste that's in a sensitive range. It just doesn't work for me. So there's a long way to go with all these little things. I've had inclusion on the social level, but in terms of participation and some of the sports naturally, like the cross-country season, and I've taken up pro running in recent months. They're naturally inclusive of someone like me because they involve a handicap system. So my handicap is based on past performance. So that's sort of naturally self-calibrating, and I'm able to cope with the environment of the track or the oval or wherever it's held, or the bush, which I particularly do enjoy. It's sort of a lot of my story is perhaps we need a little bit more work done in some grassroots circles, especially outside of the big cities.
Yeah, great. Emma, you mentioned that you use AAA Play to find sport for Sunny to participate in. So AAA Play is an information and referral service. So we give you the contact details to then contact the club. What did the club do before you joined that gave you the confidence to contact them?
Well, for tennis, it's a small club. I spoke to the coach on the phone, and he was just very open to to find out where we were at, to get Sunny in and see where his skills were at, and he he knew the adapted rules for wheelchair tennis, having been a ball kid at the Australian Open. So we talked about that, and it was a lot to do with communication. As Sunny went on, he started his tennis lessons there, but he also ended up getting involved with lessons at Melbourne Park as well with the Tennis Australia wheelchair coaching team. And they invited his local coach in too, so that they could work together on what Sonny's needs were and get him involved in more social tennis with other junior players across Melbourne too. And Sonny's coach, local coach, is always just eager to do whatever he can. He's just become very passionate. Well, he's always been very passionate and shown us that and communicated. He's become very like a friend of the family, which has been wonderful. With basketball, I got the details from AAA Play Again. Their communication from Basketball Victoria has always been excellent. They had sports chairs. They communicated with me lots before we went for the first time to see if there was going to be a chair suitable for Sonny there. They encouraged us as a family to get involved. So when we go for sessions, my husband plays, sometimes my daughter plays too, I have on occasion, and it's very much a family and community session there. So that was just so good for all of us, but particularly for Sonny. And you really felt with Basketball Victoria that the amount of effort that they're putting in to the wheelchair basketball program, they're constantly communicating about how they're trying to grow it, talking competitions and things like that. So just it's very generally always very friendly across both those main sports. It's just, and the people, the families involved are also very welcoming, and we all do both sports, and that's been really nice too. So I would say for both sports, communication has just been amazing to make us feel confident and to make my son feel confident, and having the equipment, willing to adapt and change and learn as we go. We're all learning as we go with things too, and that's been great.
Yeah, fantastic. It sounds like communication is a really strong theme there as far as making you feel confident. Dre, you obviously had an experience connecting with WASP, and that sounds like that was sort of you've made your first sporting experience since your accident. What did they do to help you feel confident to participate in the activity?
I think, well, as you said, yeah, WASP was my first, I guess, connection to a sporting club or an association, or adaptive sporting club or an association. And I think the main thing that really helped and just helped the whole situation was the ease of access to the sport. So basically, their website is very easy to navigate. Their prices in terms of membership are very minimal. It is a non-for-profit organisation. All their snowboarding or skiing instructors are actually regular snowboard and skiing instructors in Whistler, who just have qualifications specific, like for people with disabilities. So there's no, they don't really have to get, a specific person in to coach you or guide you when you're snowboarding or skiing. They offer all the equipment rental is all through them. They have pretty much all the sit skis, all the cables, and they have a bunch of other devices which allow people with amputees, double amputees. There was even one of the days that I went, there was a quadruple amputee who was on a snowboard. I mean, how amazing is that? She was actually Australian as well. So they have all the equipment available. And I think, what else? When I came back and when I came in contact with the Australian Para Ice Hockey Association, they also had a very easy to navigate website or Facebook page, and they just had a lot of come and try days. And as soon as one worked within my schedule, boom, I was in. And I think that's definitely one thing that really helps, is just having exposure for people to come and try it, come and try the sport. which is great what Triple A is doing as well on the 2nd of May. There's that come and try day for adaptive sports. It's great. I mean, even if you're not a person with a disability, just come and try, have a go. That's all it is. Just do it.
Fantastic. Love the Triple A play plug. 2nd of May, Paralympics come and try day. Tony, do you want to talk a little bit more about, so you've obviously joined clubs that are not necessarily adaptive sports, but you mentioned that you require a certain level of adaptation. How have you communicated what your needs are to the club, and how have you found the response to that?
Good question. Sometimes I do sort of try and talk about things, if there's a certain need. And we actually do have one coach who his background is in psych nursing, so he's sort of studied a bit of the psychology side of things. And I get the impression he has had some exposure to disability as a side effect of that, because he worked out pretty quickly. The best way to sort of get things through to me is break it down to one thing at a time, which is a lot easier to process. So sometimes it's little things like changing the communication style, and some people are better at it than others. It's sometimes a difficult environment because there's a lot of competing priorities, as you can imagine, a typical club, because I'm also one of the older ones, and a lot of the focus does tend to be on youth, especially this time of year. They've just had the nationals for the open age and underage in Sydney. I've had some success in communicating some needs, and I have also been able to sort of say, look, I need I'm stayed somewhere, I need the room by myself. And a lot of particularly some of the older guys that I do often stay with are really good, because it's probably an age thing. We all sort of have a respect. Everyone sort of by the time they reach their 50s or 60s tends to have their own unique needs anyway, whether there's a disability or not involved. So that helps sometimes, being with some of the older, staying with some of the older guys when I'm away. So there's a few things that sort of come to mind, but it is very much dependent on the individual. Some people do have the skills and experience, some probably not so much, or it's simply a case of occasionally someone just has a style that's not compatible with the way I process stuff, and all I can do then is go and find someone else, which usually is practical, but not always. And sometimes I do actually sort of go to one person for one thing and someone else for another tip. One-on-one when I can get it is nice, but that was one of the good things about COVID, when we're only allowed to train with one other. I happened to partner with the aforementioned psych nurse, because not only is he a good coach for me, but turns out we have very similar training needs. We focus on similar events, so and our performance is close enough. He's slightly quicker, but close enough that we can train together without things getting too unwieldy. So sometimes circumstances help too. I said COVID was probably a plus in that respect, as opposed to the normal group scenario where you can get lost in the crowd a little.
You're one of the few people that have found a silver lining in the COVID 2020 saga. Thank you, Tony. I've got one last question that I didn't give our panel a heads up about, so I apologise. You're going to have to think on the spot for this one. But just, I guess, we've got a lot of clubs that are wanting to be more inclusive. From a participation from a participant perspective, what's your top tip that you would give clubs wanting to be more inclusive? How about we start with you, Emma?
I already put it in the chat, actually. My top tip is to get on the AAA Play database so that, yeah, people can find out that way. I mean, I found out so much by just one phone call. It was amazing. So that would be my first number one tip.
Great, thank you. Tony, your top tip?
I think, well, I've probably got two. Communication, communicate with your athletes, see what their needs are and how you can meet them. And the one that goes along with that is be informed, get training, look up resources. I think those two go hand in hand.
Yeah, great. Dre, top tip from you?
I think, well, definitely second Tony's communication. Everyone has different communication needs and how they process information. Second tip, I'd say accessibility for people with disabilities and price point. I mean, just coming from a self-funded perspective, it does get quite expensive to fund prostheses, etc. So if a club, has fairly high membership costs and that kind of stuff, it does, I feel like it's a barrier for participants. So, and then definitely have come and try days, or the clubs can, align themselves with an association like AAA and go along with come and try days. Yeah.
There's a whole bag full of top tips there to get people started. Thank you very much to Emma, Dre and Tony for your wonderful insights.